Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I am here with a light and breezy book tag. I feel like I answered similar questions to a lot of these very early on my channel, but since so many of you are new here, I thought I would revisit this tag and reintroduce some of my dilemmas as a book nerd, which I feel we can all relate to. I saw this video first done on Naomi's channel, which I will link down below, and I will try to link the original creator as well. The first dilemma of any book nerd is, of course, book storage. So the question is, how do you store and organize your books? I have a system, but I feel like it's gotten less organized sounding as it's grown. Being the daughter of a librarian, I always want to organize my fiction A to Z by author and my nonfiction according to the Dewey Decimal System, approximately. Since I don't have a full-time cataloger, I'm not going to go into the ones place, but vaguely grouped according to the hundreds categories. However, as my collection has grown, that has had to shift slightly. So at the moment I have one tall bookcase and one small bookcase full of fiction organized A to Z. One shelf of that is purely for plays because there were too many of them to fit in my nonfiction bookshelf. And then I also have that nonfiction bookshelf organized according to Dewey Decimal System. Then I needed even more space, so we expanded to this bookcase that is here behind me. Again, fiction runs by author last name A to Z, and after that, nonfiction according to Dewey Decimal. Then I ran out of space on that bookcase, so I've moved into one of the bookcases in the guest room next door as well. Again, same system, fiction A to Z, nonfiction Dewey Decimal. I also have a few shelves on a different bookcase in there as well for all of the books that I read for university, and those are organized by course and the order in which I read them. The books for my English literature courses first, and then any books I read for my Spanish courses after that. Then in my office I have a few bookshelves. I have one tall bookshelf and one shelf of another for all of my children's and young adult books that I wanted to keep, as well as two large bookshelves, the bulk of which is taken up by reading from my graduate or postgraduate degree if you're outside the US. My master's in education required a lot of reading. I also have all of my sheet music in there, as that is where all of my music lessons and practicing have always happened. Jasna publications, opera news publications, and two shelves for craft supplies. The next dilemma is tracking. So how do you keep track of what books you own and what books you've read? These days, it is mainly online. I am a member of both Goodreads and Storygraph, and both of those are linked in the description box. However, I do have two other personal ways. I have a spreadsheet that was originally done by the website Book Riot a few years ago, and I have just continued to make copies of it and adapt it year after year after that, just for my own edification and to keep track of statistics. I find that quite fun. I also have a journal here on the side, which was given to me by my lovely friend Amanda when we were just 20 years old, and I originally didn't know what to do with it. Actually, the day I received it, I opened it and then immediately shoved it in my suitcase and headed out the door because I was on my way to study abroad in Spain. When I got there, I had to think about how I wanted to use it. So I decided to make it, this was before I knew about Goodreads, although I did end up joining Goodreads a few months later. I decided to make it a record of all the books that I had read from the age of 20, because it was a nice round number, and I misspoke, that is in fact January of 2012. And so as you can see, I just keep track of the title, the author, when I started it, and when I finished it. And so far, I have used this much of it. So it looks like I'm about halfway through, so I can't wait to see where this takes me in the future too. The third dilemma is borrowing. Do you lend your books out? I do, but I lend them to certain people who I know, who I trust, and who live close enough for me to lend them books. By and large, I like to keep them by me unless I know that you are going to treat them well and bring them back to me in good condition. Dilemma number 4 is, of course, buying. How do you buy or otherwise acquire your books? Mostly these days, I end up buying my books secondhand, either through secondhand bookshops or through library book sales. Library book sales are my favorite because books are so affordable and it supports a good cause. Sometimes I will buy through your standard booksellers like, well, it used to be Book Depository if I can't get hold of a book in the US, occasionally Barnes & Noble or Amazon, but I try to do that as rarely as I can. I will also borrow books digitally through my library, either as ebooks or audiobooks. I don't tend to buy as many books on Audible anymore, although I do have a lot of credits. I do have a lot of credits stacked up. So occasionally, if there's no other way to get hold of an audiobook, I may buy it on Audible that way. I was a much bigger library user pre-pandemic, but honestly, library book sales were so great that when the pandemic hit, I really just kept going with buying books because, as I said, those library book sales make it so affordable. And then, if things get really busy at work, I don't have to worry about due dates. Dilemma number 5 is comments. How do you respond to the "how do you read so much" question or other similar comments? Honestly, I haven't really gotten those. You all have been very, very good about not asking that question, or we are such kindred spirits that we read the same amount and it's not uncommon. And I don't read an uncommon number of books to you. Honestly, I think the best answer is to bring a book anywhere you go and to make sure you carve out time in your day to read. That second part is the part that I have been less good about lately, and I really need to get better about that. But I always have a book with me somewhere. It used to be that I always had a physical copy with me. These days, even if I'm traveling, I always have either an audiobook or a digital book on my phone. I don't really enjoy reading on my phone, but if I'm traveling, it is sometimes the most convenient way for me to bring a book with me. Dilemma 6, picking your next book. How do you pick what you are going to read next? It honestly depends on a lot of different factors. The first is, of course, are there any books that have deadlines, either library due dates or arcs that need to be read by a certain point? Those books obviously are top of the priority list. After that, it's based on what I feel like, or if I need to read books for other projects, or if a book is particularly tied to something going on, if it's tied to a particular holiday or a particular season that we're in, I will bump it up the priority list so that I read it at the right time. Dilemma number 7 is travel. How do you decide what books to bring with you on vacation? This again is dependent on a lot of different factors. There is, of course, the issue of space and weight and how many books can I bring with me. There is then the dilemma of what do I feel like bringing with me on this vacation? And lastly, there's the question of where am I going? Because if I am going somewhere in the US that has access to bookstores, I may not bring as many books with me. If I'm going to the UK, I will probably bring very few books with me because chances are very good that I will visit all of the bookshops while I am there and will just work through those newly acquired books on the rest of the vacation and on the way home. But if I'm going to a non-English speaking country, where I won't be able to buy another book or two if I run out, then I tend to overpack books. But I don't mind overpacking books because I do live with the constant fear of what if I run out of things to read, which explains the state of my room. Dilemma number 8 is annotation. Do you write in or highlight or otherwise annotate your books? And I really don't. It took such guts for me to put a book stamp in the front of some of my books. I really cannot bear the thought of writing in my books. That is something that was ingrained in me from the time I was a very small child. I will occasionally use tiny Post-its, the very, very thin ones, to mark important passages if I'm using a book for research. But beyond that, I really don't annotate my books. The reason I don't use big Post-its is because I had a very traumatic year in the 7th grade where I had to use Post-its to track what I was thinking about a book, and it honestly made reading slower for me. Dilemma number 9, new or backlist? Do you prefer new books or backlisted books? Here again, it depends on the book. Most of the time I tend to read backlisted books because I shop library book sales, so there aren't going to be that many new releases there. However, I have discovered a couple of new series lately that I absolutely adore, and so sometimes I will pre-order or track down new copies of those particular series. Which brings me to the 10th dilemma, which is sequels. Do you read books in a series as they are released, or do you wait until the entire series is released before you read book 1? I tend to read them as they are released. The only time that I've been able to blaze straight through series is if it is a very old series and all of the books are already published. But if it is an ongoing series, I do not mind waiting for that next book. So there you have my thoughts on these common book nerd dilemmas. Let me know down below if you do similar things, if you do something completely different. I'm always curious about how people organize their reading. And until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.